That day, Amanda Eller only meant to take a short hike through the familiar forest trails of Maui, Hawaii. She left her wallet, phone, and keys in the car, thinking she'd be back before sunset. But then she vanished without a trace. 17 days later, deep in a forest valley miles from where she started, a rescue helicopter spotted a gaunt, sunburned woman limping on one leg and weakly, raising her hand toward the sky. To survive, she had eaten wild berries, swallowed moths, slept in wild boar dens, and bandaged her own injuries while enduring flash floods and freezing nights. Strangest of all, the search team had once passed right by where she was hiding and had yet somehow missed her. This isn't just a story about someone going missing. It's a testament to human endurance and a haunting question that still lingers. What really happened out there in that forest? Amanda Eller, 35, was a yoga instructor and physical therapist living in Maui, Hawaii. Friends and patients knew her as gentle, devoted, always encouraging others to breathe deeply and thank your body. She loved the forest, often hiking a few miles into the trees to find peace, calling it her way of recharging for work. Maui is a tight-knit community where everyone seems to know each other. Amanda fit right in, remembering each patient's name, helping her neighbors, greeting strangers on the trails. To many, she was the embodiment of calm, a sense of self-awareness. The morning of her disappearance was clear with a light breeze. Amanda drove to the familiar Makawao trailhead, leaving her wallet, phone, and keys in the car, a habit of hers when planning just a short walk. She wore simple workout clothes and the same well-worn sneakers that had carried her through hundreds of miles. No one imagined it would be the last time they saw her leave that parking lot. There was one thing even her loved ones didn't know. Amanda had a habit of turning off her phone before heading into the woods, trusting that her intuition would guide her. That practice, harmless for years, became the quiet trigger for what would unfold, the start of a 17-day disappearance that remains a mystery to this day. May 8th, 2019. Amanda left home a little after 7 a.m., carrying a light backpack with just a water bottle, an energy bar, and a thin rain jacket. She drove her white Toyota RAV4 to the parking lot at the Makawao trailhead, part of the vast Makawao forest reserve, which stretches across hundreds of acres. Security cameras at the lot captured her pulling in, getting out, locking the car, and walking toward the trail. Inside the vehicle, her wallet, phone, and a spare key were left behind. By around 10 a.m., the skies over Maui began to cloud over. No one saw Amanda leave the trail. That afternoon, when she didn't return as expected, her boyfriend, Benjamin, began to worry. He texted and called, but got no response. At first, he thought maybe she was busy or out of signal range in the forest. But as night fell, a deep sense of dread crept in. That night, Benjamin contacted the police. A small search team was mobilized before dawn, beginning a sweep of the area around the parking lot. They found nothing, no signs, no calls returned, no clues, just her car still sitting in its original spot. In a small community like Maui, word of Amanda's disappearance spread quickly. By morning, dozens of volunteers, search dogs, and rescue personnel began expanding the search radius, covering both main and side trails. On the second day, more resources were deployed. Helicopters began scanning the forest from above. Drones were sent into steep or inaccessible terrain. Search crews split into teams, each assigned a mapped-out section of the forest. Locals donated food, water, and equipment to support the rescue effort. A Facebook page was launched to share updates and rally volunteers. In those early days, the focus was on the most likely scenario that Amanda had fallen, was injured, and trapped somewhere near the trail. But the forest was massive, with rugged terrain, tangled side paths, and dense vegetation. One wrong turn could be enough to vanish from sight. Some parts of the forest were so thick with growth, sunlight barely reached the ground, making visual searches nearly impossible. On the third day, a chilling discovery sent shivers through the team. Amanda's sneakers were found abandoned by the edge of a small creek. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle. Why would she take off her shoes? And if she did, how could she possibly continue walking barefoot through a forest filled with jagged roots and sharp rocks? In the days that followed, search teams chased every tiny lead, a broken branch, a faint footprint, a few berries, plucked from a bush, but none led to Amanda. Her family began to worry that if she wasn't found within the first week, her chances of survival would drop quickly. Theories began to swirl. Could someone have taken her out of the forest? Had she chosen to disappear on her own? But her friends and loved ones rejected those ideas, insisting Amanda had no reason to vanish. Police kept expanding the search, but time and resources were running out. With each passing day, the forest grew quieter, and hope grew thinner. Still, Amanda's family refused to give up. They organized fundraisers, hired private helicopters, and brought in advanced search technology. Every tip was followed, every possible clue investigated. But it was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. Somewhere, deep in that thick green maze, Amanda was still alive, but no one knew where. As the search for Amanda Eller entered its second week, an unsettling tension quietly began to surface among the rescue teams. Details about Amanda's hike on the morning she vanished weren't entirely consistent. At first, everyone had relied on the account of Amanda's boyfriend, Benjamin. He described her as cautious, someone who hiked alone, only on familiar trails, and insisted she would never stray onto a new route without a companion. Based on that, police and search crews focused their efforts around the parking area and the main paths of the Kahakapau Trail. But as volunteers spoke with more of Amanda's friends and neighbors, new details emerged, ones that didn't quite align with the original story. A yoga friend recalled Amanda mentioning just days before her disappearance that she was getting bored of the same trails and wanted to switch it up with a new route that week. A neighbor remembered seeing her at the park entrance a few mornings earlier, studying the trail map, eyes scanning the side paths as if planning something out of the ordinary. These seemingly minor details took on serious weight. When put together, they suggested a troubling possibility. Amanda may have left the main trail, and that meant the search area had to expand drastically. But widening the search came at a cost. Every hour required more manpower, more equipment, more energy. Some rescuers began to question whether their current approach was fundamentally flawed. One said, if she went off trail, we're wasting every precious minute. Others pushed back. We can't just scatter everywhere without solid leads. Tension began, creeping into the morning briefings. The red pins and strings on the maps became battlegrounds for debate. Everyone knew the grim truth. With each passing day, the chances of finding someone alive dwindled. During one meeting, a team member quietly muttered, something that brought the room to silence. We're searching in the dark, and the dark doesn't tell the truth. That wasn't just a comment about the forest. It was a reflection of how uncertain the original information had been. If everyone's assumptions about Amanda's route were wrong, then every rescue plan up to that point had been built on shaky ground. And the terrifying part? Only one person knew what really happened, and she was still lost in the vast Hawaiian wilderness. In the days that followed, the search took on a rhythm of desperate hope and crushing frustration. Hope, because every so often a new clue surfaced. Frustration, because those clues almost always led nowhere. On the 10th morning, a volunteer team reported a small but heart-pounding discovery. In a dense area of forest near a dry creek bed, they found a patch of earth slightly sunken with scattered leaves that looked disturbed. Beside it, a few broken branches and a rock with a faint slide mark. One of them said, "Looks like someone rested here." No clothes, no backpack, no blood. But even a possible shelter site was enough to stir fresh hope. That afternoon, another group found a barefoot footprint in the damp mud near a narrow side trail. It was small, narrow, possibly a woman's. They took photos and compared it to Amanda's shoe. Size, it seemed to match. But when the print was analyzed at the command center, search experts couldn't confirm. The soil had begun to dry. The shape was blurred. Recent rain may have distorted it. Another flicker of hope extinguished. A third lead came from a local hunter. He told volunteers that on Saturday afternoon, while tracking wild boar along a ridge, he heard a faint cry, echoing from a nearby valley. The sound was broken, too unclear to tell if it was human or animal. He tried to follow it, but the slope was steep and overgrown, and he lost the trail. By the time he turned back, the voice was gone. I can't say for sure, but it gave me goosebumps, he told one volunteer. Each of these clues, the sunken patch, the muddy print, the distant cry, was logged, marked on the maps, and discussed at length, but none were strong enough to narrow the search. The psychological toll was growing. Mornings brought new optimism. Evenings brought back the same empty hands. One rescuer sighed, "It's like we're chasing shadows. Every time we think we're close, it just slips away." And somewhere in that sea of green, if Amanda was still alive, she might have been hearing the helicopters, distant voices calling her name, but unable to make herself found. By day 11, as hope thinned and fatigue set in, one bold decision changed everything. A volunteer group led by Sarah Haynes, Amanda's close family friend and frequent hiking partner, chose to go off script. Sarah believed something fundamental was wrong with the current strategy. If it were Amanda, she said, she wouldn't give up. And if she were hurt, she'd head toward water and food. First, instead of following the pre-assigned sectors, Sarah led her group into a little explored area, steep, overgrown, and lacking any clear trail. Many had avoided it before, citing the danger and difficulty. But Sarah believed this was exactly the kind of place Amanda might be trapped. As the team pushed deeper in, the light faded. Only thin rays broke through the thick canopy above. The ground was slick, tangled with roots. The sound of insects and a distant stream filled the silence, a steady hum that made it easy to lose direction. Sarah walked slowly, eyes scanning everything. A scratch on a tree trunk, disturbed leaves, anything out of place. Then they saw it, a few half-eaten berries, their peels, left on a damp rock. Sarah knelt, picked one up, smelled it, and said with near certainty, if Amanda were here, this is what she'd be eating to stay alive. Not far from that spot was another slight depression in the earth, with a few snapped branches, signs someone may have rested there. They marked the spot, took photos, and radioed the command center. But the terrain was too rough to continue safely, and they had to turn back before fully exploring the area. What they didn't know then was this: the spot they had just reached was only a few hundred meters from Amanda's actual location. Back at base, Sarah couldn't hide her frustration. "I think we were so close," she said. "But in a search, this vast close doesn't mean found. One bend in the path, one thick tree canopy, and close becomes impossibly far." Her findings were logged in the official reports, but they weren't enough to alter the overall search strategy. No one knew that just days later, another team, approaching from a different direction, would finally walk into that same patch of forest and find what everyone had been searching for. Day 16 brought clear skies and dry air over Maui, perfect flying weather. That morning, a private helicopter funded by donations from the community and Amanda's friends lifted off. On board were an experienced pilot, 2 volunteers, and a mounted camera recording the entire flight. They had already combed remote, hard-to-reach areas throughout the week, but today's mission focused on ravines and waterfalls, places long overlooked due to treacherous terrain and poor visibility. As the helicopter followed a narrow gorge lined with steep, moss-covered cliffs, the dense canopy nearly blocked the forest floor from view. One volunteer scanned the ground below through binoculars, searching for any movement or hint of color that didn't belong among the endless green. Suddenly, he froze. "Wait, stop! Someone's down there!" His voice crackled through the headset, bringing the cabin to a stunned halt. The pilot quickly dropped altitude and circled around for a better view. Beneath the trees, on a narrow patch of land near a stream, stood a thin, sunburned figure, clothes tattered, She limped, barely able to put weight on one leg, and raised her arm weakly toward the sky, trying to catch their eyes. It was Amanda Eller. For a moment, no one on board could believe what they were seeing. 17 days missing, while many had braced for the piosage. Worst, she was still there. Alive, though barely holding on. The pilot located a flat stretch of rock a few hundred meters away and landed. The two volunteers scrambled toward her, weaving through slick boulders and tangled vines. As they reached her, Amanda gave a faint smile, lips cracked, eyes brimming with tears. "I heard you this morning," she whispered, her voice nearly gone. One volunteer wrapped her in a thermal blanket. The other handed her water. Amanda sipped slowly, hands trembling. A quick assessment revealed a broken tibia in her left leg, a swollen knee, deep lacerations and gashes on her, bare feet, and severe dehydration. But she was alert, clear-headed, responsive. As they guided her toward the chopper, the leaves tangled in her hair, the scent of damp forest clinging to her, and the fragile relief on her face became a moment the rescue team would never forget. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Amanda toward the hospital, its rotor blades echoing off the canyon walls. Below, the forest remained silent, holding tight to the heritage story it had hidden for 17 long days until Amanda herself could finally tell it. Wrapped in the thermal blanket as the helicopter soared away, Amanda leaned back in her seat, eyes closed, lips moving as if she wanted to speak. One volunteer leaned in and gently asked, "Do you want to tell us what happened?" Amanda opened her eyes and gave a slow nod. She said that on the morning of May 8th, she had planned a short 3-mile hike, but at a fork in the trail, instead of following the usual path, she decided to trust her intuition and took a smaller side trail, believing it would loop back to the main route. She hiked farther than intended before realizing she was disoriented. Everything looked the same. Green, winding paths, dissolving into one another like a maze. She tried to retrace her steps but saw nothing familiar. Her phone was in the car, and as dusk fell, she realized she was truly lost. On day 3, while trying to shortcut through a ravine, Amanda slipped and fell nearly 20 feet onto wet rocks. The impact broke her left tibia, tore cartilage in her knee, and sent searing pain through her hip. That night, a heavy rainstorm flooded the ravine and swept away her shoes. From that point on, she was forced to walk, barefoot, over sharp stones, tangled roots, and slick mud, each step carving new wounds into her feet. She found shelter in an abandoned wild boar den, lining it with ferns and dry leaves to stay warm. Her only food was wild berries, leaves, and caterpillars, each one swallowed slowly to avoid getting sick. She often heard helicopters and distant voices calling, but the steep terrain and thick forest canopy made it impossible to climb to an open space in time to signal for help. During the day, she searched for food and water from a small stream nearby. At night, she curled into the leaves, listening to wind and forest sounds in the dark. Amanda admitted there were moments when she thought she wouldn't survive, especially during cold, rainy nights, her body shaking, her leg burning with pain. But each time despair crept in, she thought of her family, Benjamin, and her yoga students waiting for her. I kept telling myself, if I give up, they'll never find me. In time, I have to stay alive, just long enough for someone to find me. By the time she finished speaking, the helicopter was nearing the hospital. A rescue team member squeezed her hand and said, "You did something most people couldn't." Amanda gave a faint smile and whispered back, "I didn't have a choice. I had to survive." Amanda's story left everyone on board in stunned silence, and it quickly rippled through the search command center, forcing many to rethink everything they believed about the past 2 weeks. For days, the dominant theory had been that if Amanda was seriously injured, she wouldn't survive more than a week in such harsh, wet jungle conditions. Some had even started to believe she'd left the forest early on or been taken elsewhere. But the truth was far different. Not only had Amanda survived 17 days with a broken leg and no shoes, she had done it within the search zone, itself in an area one of the teams had already passed through. The terrain, deep ravines, and thick canopy had shielded her from view. The sound of helicopters echoed strangely off the canyon walls, making her signals hard to detect. That explained why clues like half-eaten berries or sunken resting spots had appeared, but never led directly to her. As news spread, many volunteers felt a mix of relief and quiet regret. Relief that Amanda was alive. Regret that they had unknowingly passed so close, just hundreds of meters from where she was fighting for every breath. Sarah Haynes, the one who had led a group into that very area days earlier, sat silently for hours, replaying the moment she found the berry peels. "I knew she was nearby," she whispered, eyes red, "but Eller didn't go far enough." This twist also raised deeper questions about the rescue strategy. Had early assumptions cost them precious time? Was the hostile topaz search system flawed in forests like Makawao, where every square meter can hide a person? Some experts began calling for new approaches: thermal imaging, infrared drones, or three-dimensional search tactics, rather than relying solely on ground-level sweeps. For Amanda, being rescued wasn't a miracle. When asked by a reporter what kept her going, she simply said, "I chose to live." 3 small words, but they carried the full weight of everything she endured: the searing pain, the biting cold, the gnawing hunger, the total isolation. It's also a reminder to us all that sometimes survival isn't just about luck or skill. It begins with a decision not to give up, even in the darkest of places. After Amanda was rescued and brought to the hospital, what followed wasn't just a joyous reunion. Behind the hugs and tears, a quiet crisis of trust began to simmer within the community and among the rescue teams. For over 2 weeks, hundreds of people had poured their time, effort, money, and even personal safety into the search. They had followed initial theories, mapped out the terrain, marked every area, and truly believed that their strategy was sound. But Amanda's account forced everyone to ask, where did we go wrong? Volunteers started retracing their steps, both physically and mentally. Some realized they had been overly influenced by the safe zone mindset, focusing only on familiar, well-traveled trails where the odds of finding someone seemed highest. The area where Amanda had been trapped was marked early on as dangerous and unlikely to be accessed by a lost hiker. As a result, it had been skipped multiple times. The early assumptions, once helpful, had quietly become invisible barriers, blinding the teams to real clues, hiding in plain sight. Amanda's family, though grateful she was alive, couldn't avoid the difficult questions either. Benjamin, her boyfriend, remained silent in front of the cameras. But in private, he admitted feeling guilty. "I assumed she wouldn't take risks," he said, "but clearly I didn't know everything." The media jumped in, and headlines began asking uncomfortable questions about the competence of rescue efforts in such rugged terrain. One local paper led with 17 days in the forest, saved, but could it have been sooner? In the comment sections, the public split into 2 camps. Some called it a miracle and urged gratitude, while others demanded accountability and a re-examination of the entire rescue process. From her hospital bed, Amanda listened to these debates and quietly shook her head. For her, survival was enough. But she also understood that her story had become more than just a personal triumph. It had become a stress test for the public's trust in the rescue system. And the cracks in that system were now impossible to ignore. Then, just as tensions peaked, Amanda shared something in a private interview that sent everything into a new tailspin, a second twist that challenged every theory once again. Now rested and more lucid, Amanda began recounting her ordeal in greater detail. At first, it sounded like what she'd told the press: lost, injured, surviving on what she could find. But when investigators asked her to recall each day, step by step, one strange detail emerged, and it didn't match any prior search reports. Amanda claimed that around day 8, she heard voices, not distant echoes, but nearby. Footsteps crunching dry leaves. Voices speaking through radios. The unmistakable sounds of people. She shouted. She banged a stick on rocks to make noise. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then the footsteps retreated. She never saw anyone. But the feeling lingered, haunting. They heard me, and chose not to come closer. The investigator frowned, asking if she might have imagined it, hallucinations from exhaustion or dehydration. Amanda shook her head firmly. I was awake. I was clear. I know what I heard. She even recalled catching a faint scent of cigarette smoke in the air. Odd, since most search teams were forbidden from smoking in the Tig forest due to fire risk. That detail, once written into the report, sparked immediate controversy. Some dismissed it as a misperception under extremes, stress, but others started asking darker questions. What if someone really was out there and didn't want to be found? Rumors began to swirl through the community. Some pointed to illegal boar hunters operating in secrecy and avoiding all contact. Others mentioned a group of young men once caught, growing marijuana deep in the forest reserve, men who may have spotted Amanda and fled, fearing police involvement. No one had proof. But the idea that someone chose not to help her took hold and disturbed everyone. The official investigation found no solid evidence to confirm or deny Amanda's claim. But for many, the mere possibility was chilling. She could have been rescued sooner if only someone had walked a few steps closer. For Amanda, that memory remained a shadow she couldn't explain and wasn't sure she wanted to. As she recounted the final days of her ordeal, Amanda described one last image, one that burned into her memory so clearly she still saw it whenever she closed her eyes. It was the morning of day 15, just after a cold night of rain. Amanda crawled out of the wild boar den toward the stream to drink. Morning light slanted through the trees, slicing golden ribbons across the misty forest floor. And there, right by the water's edge, she saw them. A pair of sneakers, soaked, caked in fresh mud, but unmistakably not her own. They were larger, a different style, and looked recently abandoned. The mud was still wet. No footprints around, no voices, just the sound of the stream and distant birdsong. Amanda froze. She considered taking them. Her feet were shredded, and any protection was better than none. But something about the scene felt wrong. If someone left them, she thought, they might still be nearby. A prickling sense of being watched crept over her. She spun around, eyes scanning the tree canopy and the shadows between trunks. Nothing moved. Yet the silence pressed in. She turned away, leaving the shoes where they were. Unanswered question in the middle of the forest. Amanda didn't mention this detail until days after her rescue, but once she did, it reignited speculation. Could these shoes be connected to the voices she heard? Did they belong to the mystery figure who walked away, or were they simply left by another hiker, unaware of her? Desperate presence nearby? No one could say. But the image of those shoes, wet, out of place, silently waiting by the water, became a lingering question mark in Amanda's survival story. A detail so concrete, yet so ambiguous. A sign of human presence, but also a trigger for primal fear. The fear that in the vast wild, you're not alone, and you may never know who's out there with you. This moment doesn't just hold the audience in suspense. It plants a deep unease, urging them to stay and unravel the whole story. Because if a pair of unknown shoes appeared near where Amanda was trapped, then what really happened during those 17 days in the forest? The day Amanda was discharged from the hospital, the skies over Maui were just as clear as the morning she left home for what was supposed to be a short hike. Her family, friends, and many of the volunteers who had searched for her gathered outside. There were hugs, tears, and quiet smiles of relief. But even in that moment of reunion, a silence lingered, one that no celebration could fully erase. It was the silence of questions that would never be answered. Amanda never blamed anyone for not finding her sooner. She said everyone had done their best with the information they had. But she also admitted there were moments in the forest when she felt she wasn't completely alone, and that thought still sent chills through her. I know I survived because I chose to, she said in her final interview before leaving the island, but I also know not everything that happened can be explained. Her story became a source of public debate. Some hailed it as a miracle, a testament to human willpower. Others saw it as a warning, a reminder of the limits, search and rescue systems, and how fragile trust can be when things go wrong. The official report closed with the conclusion: missing due to disorientation, survived through self-reliance until rescue. But on Maui, the story never truly ended. For those who had searched for her, their memories of Makawao forest were forever altered. They no longer just remembered the lush green leaves or the sound of running water, but also the strange, disquieting feeling of walking through shadows where someone might be close, but invisible. They remembered the image of a frail woman limping through a canyon, raising her hand toward life. Amanda left the hospital leaning on a handmade wooden can. Before getting into the car, she paused, took a deep breath, and looked out toward the dark green ridges of the mountains. No one knew exactly what she was thinking, but in that moment, it seemed clear that she, more than anyone, understood how thin the line between life and death truly was, and how lucky she was not to have crossed it. In the weeks that followed, Amanda began appearing at community gatherings, not to retell her survival story as a triumph, but to share what the forest had taught her about fear, limits, and resilience. At one event, she spoke slowly, eyes gazing into the distance. In the forest, you learn that survival is never guaranteed. Every choice you make could be your last. And if you want to live, you have to choose it, over and over, every hour, every minute. But alongside her words of inspiration, Amanda remained quiet about some parts of her experience. She never again spoke publicly about the voices that walked away, or the mysterious pair of shoes by the stream. When asked, she only offered a faint smile and said, "Some things I'm leaving in the forest." The room always fell silent after that, as if everyone sensed she knew more than she was willing to share. Her story eventually became part of Maui's collective memory, a symbol of willpower, but also a haunting reminder of how vulnerable we are in the face of nature. And yet, something about it never quite felt resolved, like a song that ends on an unfinished chord. Months later, a volunteer who had helped search for Amanda shared that sometimes, while walking near Makawao forest at dusk, he still felt like someone was watching him, not threatening, not visible, just present. Like when they were searching for Amanda, he didn't know if it was his imagination or something else, but each time he thought of those wet shoes on the bank and the questions that were never answered. Amanda still teaches yoga. She lives slower now, savoring each morning sunbeam through the window. But deep down, she knows some part of her is still out, there in Makawao, among the thick trees, the cold rainy nights, and the moments when she had to choose life, again and again. The story ends, but the question remains. Was Amanda simply a victim of nature, or was there an unseen force that touched her fate in that forest? And if there was, will the truth forever lie buried beneath leaves and fog?